Here's what's coming up on the world today. Mumbai overtakes Wuhan as COVID-19 pandemic cases spike. Statues of figures related to the slave trade are being pulled down in Britain and the United States. Plus, South Korea says it will take legal action against defectors sending aid and messages to the north. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. You're watching The World Today, and I'm Akaite Afia. We begin in Mumbai, which has announced a spike in the number of COVID-19 cases at 51,000, taking it past that of Wuhan, the epicenter of the pandemic. It comes amid a surge of infections in India, which was recorded more than 266,600 cases. The state of Maharashtra, of which Mumbai is the capital, has 90,000 of those cases. Infections are also spiking in Delhi, where authorities say they expect to see more than 500,000 cases by the end of next month. The surge coincides with India's decision to relax restrictions after 3 months of a stringent lockdown that was intended to curb the spread of the virus. On June 8th, shopping malls, places of worship, and offices were allowed to reopen. Before that, shops, marketplaces, and transport services had all been allowed to operate as well. But experts say there were no other option but to lift the lockdown, which exacted a massive economic toll on the country. The death toll from the coronavirus continues to rise in the UK despite plans to continue reopening the economy. In the meantime, scientists have been looking at the genetics of the virus.
Over in the UK, a major analysis of the genetics of the virus shows that coronavirus was brought into the United Kingdom on at least 1,300 occasions. The researchers analyzed the genetic code of viral samples taken from more than 20,000 people infected with coronavirus in the UK. The analysis also finds China, where the pandemic started, had a negligible impact on cases in the UK, and instead most cases came in from European countries. Germany will lift border controls with Switzerland, France, Austria and Denmark on Monday. Interior Minister Horst Seehofer has announced border controls between Austria and Germany have already been lifted, but the new move means Austrians can return from holiday destinations like Italy and Croatia without having to go into quarantine or show a negative test. In France, primary schools started to reopen on the 11th of May in green zones where the rate of infection was low. The government issued detailed instructions to schools on how to ensure the safety of pupils. This includes a maximum of 15 children to a class, no shared toys and staggered arrivals. Children over 11 are required to wear masks. Over in Japan, Tokyo 2020 chief executive Toshiro Muto has said the rearranged Olympics will not be done with grand splendor, but will be simplified. Muto said more than 200 ideas to simplify and reduce cost for the rescheduled games has been discussed, but gave no time frame as to when these changes might be implemented. The games originally scheduled to start next month were postponed for a year in March because of the pandemic. In Africa, a senior Egyptian health official has warned that the number of confirmed daily cases in the country is expected to surge this month. He says the daily count this month will reach 2,000 and possibly higher. But he predicted that cases will start to decline by mid-July. Egypt has so far registered about 35,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 1,200 deaths.
Here in West Africa, Ghana is making moves to develop what could be a cheap rapid testing kit for COVID-19. The laboratory behind the initiative hopes to get the green light from the country's health authorities, which could pave the way for better handling of the coronavirus and reopen the economy much faster.
Ghana's homegrown Incas Diagnostic expects approval for its rapid antibody test kit for the new coronavirus from regulators by the end of July, saying the test could help health authorities plan the easing of pandemic restrictions. Incas founder and CEO Lord Anthony Basing says the test uses finger prick blood to detect two types of antibodies produced by the body when it is fighting off COVID-19 infection.
It's able to give you the various components.
He says most of the testing today are molecular tests, which detects the virus itself. The Incas test is a little different from that because it tests the body's reaction to the virus.
If you're able to do the antibody test and you're able to find out that maybe a majority of people have had the infection and are having antibodies, you can open up those systems. They can go to church and everything because at the end of the day, they are not going to transmit the virus to any other person.
Ghana has seen one of the highest number of positive COVID-19 cases in West Africa at nearly 10,000. It has begun a phased easing of restrictions put in place in early March to curb the spread of the disease and plans to reopen schools and universities from June 15. President Nana Akufo-Addo said the country will invest and ramp up local manufacturing of health equipment, including gloves, masks and scrubs, while increasing tracing and testing for the virus. It has so far tested over 233,000 people. Founded in 2002 in Ghana's second largest city, Basing says polymerase chain reaction are the gold standard in detecting the novel coronavirus, but they're also expensive, and the rapid test kits could help contain the spread of the virus within communities more cost-effectively.
Africa is a net consumer of diagnostics and not a net producer. So basically what we do is that we import every single kit that we are going to use here in Africa. And therefore, when you have a company that basically develops and manufactures here in Ghana, there are several things that makes it very important. First of all, it becomes a way to build the capacity of young people in Africa to be able to develop test kits. Secondly, it actually gives you an African perspective. There are a lot of diseases that are African. And so when you are developing a test for a disease that is in Africa, the utility, the engineering and everything has a context that you need to put in place.
Founded in 2002 in Ghana's second largest city, it's already producing pregnancy test kits and has the capacity to produce around 50,000 kits per week. The company is also working alongside developers in Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa and Senegal, backed by the World Health Organization, and a seed fund of $10,000 on a mobile app that aims to help trace potentially high-risk people. Incas said it can manufacture 50,000 kits a week and hopes the FDA will approve it within the next few weeks. If it does, Basing says he'll sell it outside of Ghana.
We're still keeping our eyes on the global anti-racism protests, and it appears not just one statue will be pulled down, many more will get the same treatment. In the UK, local authority workers in Leeds were seen cleaning a statue of Queen Victoria after it was defaced by the protesters. The statue commemorating Britain's 19th century queen had been sprayed with graffiti. Meanwhile, in Scotland, a statue commemorating Robert Dundas, 2nd Viscount Melville, was also daubed with graffiti. Dundas' father, Henry, was key to obstructing the abolition of slavery in the UK before it was finally outlawed in 1833. Statues glorifying slave traders and colonialists have come into sharp focus in recent days following the toppling of the 17th century merchant Edward Colston in Bristol by protesters. Christopher Columbus statue in Richmond, Virginia in the United States is also getting a similar treatment. It was torn down and dragged along the ground before being dumped in a lake. A video posted online showed a group of protesters in Byrd Park pulling the felled statue along the ground, draped in a burning American flag and covered in red paint. The Italian explorer had arrived in the Americas in 1492 and paved the way for Europeans to colonize the land. Columbus Day in the United States, the day commemorating his landing, has long been protested over the social and economic injustice experienced by Native Americans since his arrival. A statue of Confederate officer John B. Castleman was taken away from its site in Louisville, Kentucky on Monday, June 8th, after being vandalized during recent protests. New York, a top police union official has defended officers in the state, saying news media and elected officials have vilified officers over how they handled protesters, calling for an end to police brutality. Protesters have clashed with police in several cities following marches in the past 2 weeks over the officer-involved death of George Floyd in Minneapolis on May 25th. Floyd's death was caught on video showing a white officer kneeling on his neck for nearly 9 minutes as Floyd said, "I can't breathe."
In the black community, mothers are worried about their children getting home from...
Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters packed Seattle's City Hall late Tuesday, demanding the mayor's resignation and the police force defunded. Days after Seattle's Mayor Jenny Durkan and police chief promised a month-long moratorium on tear gas, the department used it again on protesters overnight on Sunday, June 7th, bringing severe criticism. The protest happened hours after George Floyd, an unarmed black man whose death under the knee of a white police officer roused worldwide protest against racial injustice, was memorialized at the funeral of his boyhood hometown of Houston, Texas. Floyd's dying words have become a rallying cry for hundreds of thousands of protesters around the globe who have since taken to the streets, undaunted by the coronavirus pandemic, demanding justice for Floyd and an end to the mistreatment of minorities by U.S. law enforcement. Well, let's talk to Channels Television's Washington correspondent, Maria Byrd. Maria, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So we're hearing so many things during these protests, but first off, let's talk about the statues being pulled down. They are offensive now to protesters, but they have been a part of American and British history for decades.
Yes, you're exactly correct. If you go back to the UVA riots and the protests that happened down in Charlottesville, Virginia, that was just a few years ago when protesters were going against those Confederate soldier statues that exist all throughout the United States, but specifically in southern states in the U.S. As you mentioned, Louisville, Kentucky, they actually removed that statue. And so it is finally, the days are coming that people are beginning to understand that that's just not history that should be erected as if we are proud of that history that obviously was supporting slavery in the U.S. and supporting racism that exists today. That was a sign that many African Americans and many supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement believe was a sign of racism in the United States.
And we all know there are good cops and bad cops, but at this time it seems that all cops are a target. So how is America responding to drawing the distinction? Because whether they like it or not, there still needs to be a maintenance of law and order.
Yes, if you look back at the policing system and really look at the systematic issues that have existed now, almost if you think back to the Jim Crow era, you think back to the Civil Rights era when African Americans were, you had whites only and blacks only. And when the beginning of the movement started to eradicate that, and you look at the way that the police dealt with bus boycotts in Alabama and all across the United States, you can see that this brutality against African Americans has existed as a result of not wanting to bring integration and to allow African Americans for equal rights. And so this goes far beyond just seeing police, making more aggressive gestures toward African Americans. This goes back to, this is why many people are advocating and saying we need to look at totally disbanding the police departments and looking at rebuilding so that they can focus on community protection, which is really why they say they are established, more so than what we have seen over recent years, which is really, almost 100-year battle for many Americans.
Well, thanks again, Maria, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Still ahead on The World Today. A lockdown never stopped anyone making music, and it never stopped the listeners either. Welcome back to The World Today. Professor of African American Studies with the Oxford College Emory University, Pearl Dow, says the national protest over the death of George Floyd needs to be promoted into a wide-ranging dialogue to discuss racial discrimination, as systematic racism is embedded in most aspects of U.S. society.
I think because of the nature of the response by the federal government to the pandemic, as well as the fact that we know that this disease is disproportionately impacting Black people and communities of color. And so I think a lot of people were already questioning citizenship. I think they were already questioning the role of the government and the lack of engagement that the government has had. It is consistent with this administration's efforts to be divisive and to play to a particular playbook. This administration has not shown itself to be helpful to the nation. This administration has shown itself to pander to a small group of the population.
The South Korean Unification Ministry says it would take legal action against 2 organizations who sent contraband material into the North a day after North Korea suspended communication hotlines with South Korea. The government says that 2 defector-run groups, Kunsayem and Fighters for a Free North Korea, had violated the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act by sending leaflets with messages, as well as aid like rice and medicine. North Korean state media have published a steady string of reports in recent days denouncing defectors as mongrel dogs. Kim Yo-jung, the sister of leader Kim Jong-un, called defectors human scum little short of wild animals, and said North Korea would be taking steps to cut off all communication with South Korea because of its failure to stop the defector groups. The Unification Ministry spokesperson, Yo Sang-ki, says the 2 defector groups have created tension between the 2 Koreas and caused danger to the border area residents' lives and safety. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jung, has taken a leading role in a new, more hardline pressure campaign against South Korea, highlighting what analysts say is a substantive policy role that goes beyond being her brother's assistant. Believed to be in her early 30s, Kim Yo-jung is the only close relative of the North Korean leader to play a public role in politics. During the 2018-2019 flurry of international diplomacy, Kim Yo-jung garnered global attention by leading a delegation to the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea. Later, she was often seen dashing about to make sure everything went well for her older brother, including holding an ashtray for him at a train station on his way to a summit with the U.S., President Donald Trump in Vietnam. But this year, Kim has taken on a more public policy role, cementing her status as an influential political player in her own right. A Swedish prosecutor, Christer Petersen, has closed the case of the 1986 assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme, accusing an insurance company graphic designer who died 20 years ago for the country's most notorious unsolved murder. Palme, who led Sweden's Social Democrats for decades and served 2 periods as prime minister, was one of the architects of Scandinavia's model of a strong welfare state and a fierce Cold War-era critic of both the United States and Soviet Union. He was shot dead in central Stockholm in 1986 after a visit to the cinema with his wife and son. The failure of the police to find a killer has sparked decades of conspiracy theories, unlikely to be silenced by Wednesday's accusation against the long-dead suspect with no political profile. Bujumbura residents say they were shocked on hearing about the death of President Pierre Nkurunziza, who had ruled the country for 15 years. The 55-year-old Nkurunziza was due to stand down in August when the retired General Evariste Ndayishimiye, who successfully stood for the ruling party in last month's election, was due to overtake. Bujumbura residents said the news of the president's death shocked them as he had not yet handed over power, with one adding that the news was too incomprehensible for him to accept. Nkurunziza, a fitness enthusiast who increasingly relied on religion and repression to rule the impoverished and unstable Central African nation, leaves behind a country dotted with the unmarked graves of his political opponents, an economy in tatters, and a question mark over whether fighting over his succession could divide the country's powerful generals and security chiefs. Moving over to Sri Lanka, as we continue on to look into this story, Sri Lanka's Elections Commission has set the country's parliamentary election date for August 5th after previously posting the poll due to the spread of the new coronavirus. The original date was April 26th, which had been posted to June 20th before Wednesday's move. The commission had waited for the Supreme Court to reject half a dozen petitions requesting that the elections not take place until the virus was under control. On Sunday, elections officials tested out voting procedures using measures such as protective gear, social distancing, and disposable pens. The trial vote was held at a Buddhist temple, which will be used as a polling center in the polls. The commission said the cost for the election will be 50% higher because of the precautions. Original Wagner, but it was reduced to 22 musicians by British composer Jonathan Dove. Also, the normally 2.5-hour-long performance was shortened to 90 minutes. A maximum 3 seats are next to each other, with many more covered in white sheets to prevent people from sitting closely to one another. The first sold-out showing will have 170 guests, a fraction of the 1,859 seats inside. Thanks so much for joining us on The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia.